Species. Unite.
These workers were so courageous to go on camera to talk about what they were being forced to do. And we had a whistleblower attorney there to protect them. And then Dateline just killed the story. What I heard through the grapevine was they were afraid that people would change the channel. It's so interesting to me that you can have stabbings and starvation and murders and all sorts of stuff on TV, but if it happens to animals, they won't do it.
Hi, I'm Elizabeth Novogratz. This is Species Unite. Most of what happens to animals in this country is designed to stay hidden. The violence, the speed, the scale, all of it is kept out of sight behind doors that the public is never meant to open. For more than 40 years, Gail Eisnitz has documented some of the worst abuses in animal agriculture. Animals skinned alive, pigs entering scalding tanks fully conscious, workers forced to brutalize animals at speeds no living being could withstand. Her investigations exposed a system built on secrecy, protected by powerful industries, and ignored by institutions charged with enforcing the law. Her work has forced congressional action, shut down factory farms, held corporations accountable, and revealed to the world what really happens on the kill floor. Not in rare moments, but every single day. And now, in her new book, Out of Sight, Gail shows us the full story. The whistleblowers that the industry tried to silence, the media outlets that backed away because the truth was too disturbing, and the personal toll she carried while uncovering evidence that very few people have had the courage to gather. This conversation is about a system that harms billions of animals, endangers workers, misleads the public, and operates with almost no meaningful oversight. Gail's work makes one thing undeniable. We can't fix what we refuse to see. Hi, Gail.
Hi, Elizabeth.
It is such an honor to have you here. We're going to talk about Out of Sight, which is your most recent book, which is awesome. But I want to get to it because one thing I learned in Out of Sight, and I just love, is how just these random things would happen to you, starting when you were like 14, that would lead you to a whole new world and just kind of change the trajectory of your life. You went to school, you went to college, and you had a few more of these moments, really, that got you to be an undercover investigator, a writer, and someone who spent decades in some of the worst places on the planet, trying and often succeeding to get other people to pay attention and see what was happening. How did all that start?
It started with me pounding the pavement after college, trying to get a job in animal protection. But that was 43 years ago, and there was hardly any movement back then at all. So it was hard to get a job. So I became an animal illustrator, and I illustrated endangered species for various publications and for shows. One of my illustrations was a baby bald eaglet, and an exterminator came into my room at a house I was renting with some friends. And even though I had a sign on the door that said, "Stay out," and he sprayed right over my baby bald eaglet illustration. So I wrote a story about that happening, and I compared it to DDT at the time, wiping out New Jersey's eagle population. It was down to one pair of bald eagles. And the New York Times thought the article was worthy of printing with the illustration that had been ruined. And that was my first New York Times story. And the bald eagle population has significantly rebounded in the last 43 years. So that's like fantastic.
So you start writing for publications, and then how do you end up at AWI, which is Animal Welfare Institute?
I just went down to Washington, D.C., as I would regularly do, and I showed some of my articles to Christine Stevens, who was the mother of the animal protection movement. She was in the 1940s lobbying for various laws in Congress, and her husband was the founder of the Kennedy Center. She was very well connected with senators and the presidents and all sorts of things. She saw my New York Times articles and hired me on the spot, so that was great.
And then you started doing investigations.
We did one investigation while we were at AWI into the fact that people's pets were being used by the Mayo Clinic for laboratory experimentation. So that was my first taste of investigations. But then I quit AWI because I felt like I wasn't doing what I came to do. Christine Stevens had wanted me to get articles published in national publications about animal cruelty issues, and that was very difficult. So I told her that I would keep doing it, but she didn't have to pay me anymore. I went to HSUS, Humane Society of the U.S., and worked there as a writer for several years. That was interesting work. I learned a lot about the various abuses to which animals are subjected, a lot. But I didn't want to just write my whole life away. So I said I was going to quit if they didn't let me be an investigator. So then I was the first female investigator, the only female investigator at the time, rather, at HSUS. I worked there for several years until there was a problem with a boss that I had who would not let me expose my slaughterhouse findings because he was not a healthy person. I don't want to give away too much of the story, but I will say he's spending life in jail at this time.
Yeah.
But in the meantime, I quit HSUS and went to work for Humane Farming Association.
And they let you do investigations in slaughterhouses.
Yes, they were very supportive and gave me the means to do whatever I wanted to do in slaughterhouses.
One thing that really struck me when you were telling some of the stories of your early investigations and then your later investigations too, you had clearly never seen any of this stuff before. Like no one really had, especially at that point. And you were going into horse slaughterhouses and all sorts of just places where just egregious cruelty, like just terrible, like horrible things were happening. And you kept your cool. Like you didn't let that take you down at all. I think most people couldn't have done that. Now there's so much video out there and there's so much people in the movement have seen a lot of that kind of stuff now. But at that time, no one had seen anything.
In fact, Christine Stevens of AWI was the one who got the Humane Methods of Slaughter Act passed. When she read my book, Slaughterhouse, which was years later, she called me because she was so overwhelmed by the fact that the Humane Methods of Slaughter Act had been on the books for many, many years, 40 plus years, and it had been zero budgeted. So there had been no money put towards its enforcement. She was absolutely appalled that these types of violations were taking place, the types that I documented, on an act that she had worked so hard to get passed.
Yeah, I can imagine. But nobody knew what was really happening. I mean, there weren't a lot of investigations happening back then.
There weren't any. I mean, nobody had ever looked to see if the Humane Methods of Slaughter Act was being enforced. And when I looked, it wasn't.
It's a really courageous, hard, often very thankless job. And you didn't really have a lot of examples of other people that you were following in their footsteps.
And I had no training, so I got myself into some dangerous situations. I just didn't really think about it, Elizabeth. I just took the next right step. I knew I didn't want to just write about it. I knew that I wanted to document and then write about it, document it and then expose it. So that's pretty much how it played out. It wasn't a matter of being courageous. It was just a matter of doing the next right thing.
And there's a lot of other people who I would also call courageous throughout your book, the whistleblowers. Will you talk about them a little bit?
The whistleblowers were amazing. I mean, my first whistleblower, Timothy Walker, observed really terrible violations of the Humane Methods of Slaughter Act. And I don't know if you want me to say them. Cows at the plant where he was working, which was the largest cow kill in the southeastern United States, were having their heads skinned while they were still fully conscious because nobody was enforcing the Humane Slaughter Act. So he contacted all of his supervisors. He was a USDA employee, and he contacted all of his supervisors, and everybody said, "Oh, it's just a little worse than other places." Well, he contacted his member of Congress. He contacted the Veterans Administration because he was a veteran, and he contacted a bunch of animal groups, and I was the only one that answered. So I went down there and talked to him and found out, talking with him and corroborating his allegations with other USDA employees and company workers, plant workers, that cows were routinely having their heads skinned while they were still fully conscious. When word got out that he had contacted me, he was fired. But we took legal action and won him his job back. And part of the process of winning him his job back, the Secretary of Agriculture had to do an investigation, had to have his underlings do an investigation of the plant and then issue a report. Then the Secretary of Agriculture himself signed the report, and the report, well, let's just say the plant closed down and went out of business suddenly.
Did you find some similar situations all over the country in terms of trying to bring attention to these absolute abusive practices and then not getting the response that you would think one would get from the USDA or from the general public or from the media?
Absolutely. I mean, we found violations that were far worse than having heads skinned alive, and we were thwarted. Well, I was thwarted every step of the way by governors, attorneys general, prosecutors, ABC, CBS, NBC, who all wanted to work on the story and spent months working with me on the story and interviewing my workers and everything, and then deciding to kill the story on the grounds that it was too disturbing. It was just difficult every step of the way, especially with the attorneys general. We presented rock solid cases with tons of video and tons of affidavit testimony from workers, and attorneys general in 6 different states refused to prosecute because they had prosecutorial discretion and they wanted to protect big ag.
And with the media, do you think they really were thinking they would go ahead with these stories and then somebody cut them off at the end? And what do you think happened there in so many situations?
Yeah, I think they really were dedicated to pursuing the stories. I think they worked with me. They came out in the field. 60 Minutes came out in the field with me. Dateline came out in the field with me. That's back when they were doing not just murder mysteries. And Dateline interviewed 12 of my workers who were skinning and dismembering cows while they were still fully conscious with their faces exposed. These workers were so courageous to go on camera to talk about what they were being forced to do. And we had a whistleblower attorney there to protect them. And then Dateline just killed the story. I heard through the grapevine was they were afraid that people would change the channel. It's so interesting to me that you can have stabbings and starvation and murders and all sorts of stuff on TV, but if it happens to animals, they won't do it.
One thing, it feels like it hasn't changed since your career began. is it's so hard to get mainstream media to talk about most of this stuff. And we don't really change it until a lot more people get on board.
That's why when I went to work for Humane Farming Association, they just went around the media by publishing full-page ads in newspapers and magazines like Time and Newsweek and New York Times and everything. Just full-page ads, because if the media is not going to do it, they just did it themselves. And it's been very successful. Like the national veal boycott, we've seen a drop of 89% of veal production since we started the national veal boycott, and that's pretty staggering. So by teaching people that veal calves shouldn't be raised in crates and never allowed to turn around, people really remember those veal ads that we ran in newspapers and magazines, because I have people that I know that say, that's what turned me vegetarian, or that's what turned me vegan, just looking at the veal calves.
During this whole, I don't know how, since you were a kid and until not that long ago, you had a rare medical condition, you still do, but you never knew what it was, and nobody seemed to be able to diagnose you. And that is a big part of this story. And I think that part of this story really keeps people in there, in the sense of people who might not read about slaughterhouses and factory farming and want to read about you and the whole, mission you are on to figure out what's going on with yourself. Will you talk about that a little bit?
I've always seen the world as pixelated, meaning that the world is made up of dots. And that's not a problem for me, because that's just the way I see the world. But it got a lot worse as I got older, where sometimes things wouldn't make sense. It was almost like having dyslexia of the world, where things just didn't compute for me, distances and depth of field and sizes, and everything got all mixed up. And I went to many doctors who just told me that my eyes were fine, my brain was fine, just forget about it. And it was extremely difficult, because I was trying to keep a job down, hold my job down, and I could barely function. I went to over 100 doctors. I never say the actual number because it's so shocking, but I was desperate. I didn't know how I was going to survive. I didn't know how I was going to function. I didn't know how I was going to pay the rent. But it wasn't identified in the scientific literature as a rare disease until 2014, so just 11 years ago. And so I was diagnosed about 4 years ago, and I still have it. I see a lot of glare and floaters now and stuff like that, but I'm not nearly as bad as I was. It was a way to keep readers reading, because it was like telling what I was going through while I was documenting all these atrocities. I didn't want it to just be a litany of horrors. I wanted it to be a tale of my life.
Well, also, I think if it were just a litany of horrors, it's so much for people to take in, even though like the animals are dealing with this 24/7. Having this story about you and what you're going through, and there's a lot of other stories in there about the workers and the whistleblowers, and that really keeps you wanting to find out what happens next. It works, because I read it in like one sitting. I've talked to a lot of people, and I know about a lot of horrible things, but there's stuff in there. Hearing those workers and whistleblower stories, like when you said a little while ago, oh, there's stuff far worse than the cows having their heads live skinned. I mean, I don't think most people think there's much worse on earth than that, having your head live skinned. But there is.
For my first book, I interviewed workers and meat inspectors who had spent a combined total of 3 million hours on the kill floor. And those workers and meat inspectors told me that they either engaged in, mostly the workers, or observed, mostly the meat inspectors, animals being strangled, beaten, boiled, skinned, and dismembered, alive, fully conscious. But to give an idea of the types of things that we saw in slaughterhouses, and things are even worse in factory farms, workers told me that they pounded away at cows' heads with ineffective stunning equipment. They repeatedly shocked hogs with defective stunning equipment. They gassed hogs that screamed, gasped, and shook their heads. They beat hogs with shackles and lead pipes. They dragged disabled animals with meat hooks in their mouths or anuses or cables around their necks, strangling them. They stuck electric prods in animals' anuses, eyes, and mouths and held them there. And they often skinned the heads, bellies, sides, and rumps, removed the legs, ears, horns, and tails of cattle who were still fully conscious. But the common thing was that hogs were being immersed in the scalding tank fully conscious. We got video of that. We got video of cows being skinned alive. We got video of a cow having an electric prod held inside its mouth. We've been able to get video of a lot of this stuff.
Why did the workers, I mean, I understand the whistleblowers, but the workers that you talked to who weren't necessarily whistleblowers, why did they tell you their stories?
Well, in the end, they ended up being whistleblowers and signing affidavits and taking videotape for us and everything.
Okay.
They told us their stories because they were so fed up with having to brutalize animals just because line speeds are so fast and getting faster in slaughterhouses. They're just sick of it.
Will you explain for people who don't know what line speeds are and what's happened with line speeds, especially recently?
Line speed is the speed with which the animals are supposed to be supposed to be humanely handled and rendered unconscious before they're bled and butchered. And the USDA inspectors who inspect meat in the plant are supposed to enforce the Humane Slaughter Act. But line speeds are the speed by which animals are killed. And in the last few decades, we've seen thousands of the nation's small to mid-sized slaughterhouses forced out of business by just a handful of these huge, high-speed operations that have the capacity to kill millions of animals a year. So you have fewer slaughterhouses killing a growing number of animals, and so slaughter line speeds have skyrocketed. And that means that for pigs, they're supposed to kill them at 1,106 pigs per line per hour. That's one hog every 3 seconds. But the last two administrations decided that wasn't fast enough. So they're lifting the cap, saying you can kill hogs as fast as you possibly can and want to kill them. For poultry, for broiler chickens that we eat as opposed to laying hens, for broiler chickens, they were killing them at 140 birds per minute, and now they're killing them at 175 birds per minute. That's 3 birds per second. So with these incredible line speeds, the production line doesn't stop for anything. It doesn't stop for injured workers, it doesn't stop for contaminated meat, and it definitely doesn't stop for slow or uncooperative animals. They go through the process fully conscious and alive.
Do we have any idea how many animals nowadays go through the process fully conscious and alive?
Well, that's a good question. I'm not sure the answer to that. I know that my findings were exposed on the front page of the Washington Post, and Congress was up in arms to learn about this. And so they actually allocated millions of dollars to enforcing the Humane Methods of Slaughter Act. So things may be a little bit better, but now inspectors are still not stationed in the areas where the animals are supposed to be rendered unconscious or killed. They make spot checks, they call them verification procedures, to these areas, and the workers know when they're coming because they have code words and whistles and handheld radios to say the inspector's coming in, so slow the line speed or something. And the problem is that less than 3%, this is so staggering to me, less than 3% of the federal meat inspection budget goes toward humane slaughter enforcement. And that's the animals that fuel the whole system. So
Right.
I don't know the answer to how many animals are still being brutalized, but it can't be that good if less than 3% of the entire meat inspection budget is going toward humane slaughter enforcement.
I think all animals in our industrial agriculture system are being brutalized on some level, right? From the minute they're born, they're brutalized. Just to make their deaths that much more painful and drawn out and agonizing is like I just don't think most people don't know this. Most people, if they heard it, wouldn't hear it. It's so hard for people to just take this information in, I think.
Yeah, I hate to have just listed off that litany of horrors because I'm afraid to turn people off.
How else do people know?
Right.
And kind of because it's our food system and there's so much secrecy around it, especially the animal agriculture part of it. There's so much secrecy that everything's hidden. You'll get arrested if you take a photo, and the rest of it. That we're all, as humans, we're trained not to look, like not to want to look.
Right.
And so nobody wants to look, and so you could kind of show them anything, and I don't know.
We're so prevented from knowing what's going on in factory farms. It's just, if people knew what was going on inside factory farms, they would not believe it.
Just the amount of abuse, just the amount of extra abuse, not even the legal abuse, right?
Some of it is exempt as standard agricultural practices like thumping or packing pound against concrete piglets that don't grow fast enough. But that's considered standard agricultural practice, and it's endorsed by the American Veterinary Medical Association, which is in bed with the meat industry.
Yeah.
But when you have one employee overseeing 2,000 animals, you can expect terrible things are going to happen.
Yeah.
The whole system is so messed up. The whole system.
And since you've been in it and witnessed to it for 40 years, and on some level, because industrial farming keeps just becoming bigger and bigger farms, faster speeds, more meat, more animals, what are some of the positive changes you've seen over the past few decades? The big picture just seems overwhelmingly negative.
Right. Well, unfortunately, that's probably because it is. But we've had some successes, and I can share the successes with you. As I mentioned, the Humane Farming Association's national veal boycott has brought veal production down by 89%. The Washington Post story that exposed my findings resulted in an annual multi-million-dollar appropriation by Congress for enforcement of the Humane Slaughter Act. We shut down what was going to be the third largest hog factory in the world. It was on the Rosebud Sioux tribal lands. We shut it down after only 2 of 13 sites were built. It was going to be producing 1 million hogs a year. And then we investigated what was going on in those 2 sites, and it was beyond comprehension what was going on inside there. The whole operation finally closed because it's unsustainable to just operate 2 sites, but it was unsustainable, the atrocities that were going on inside. They had mortality rates of 60% in some barns. I mean, it was just a mess. And then we had a great documentary on HBO about pig farm where the producer was, well, I don't know if people realize that mother sows spend their lives in farrowing crate, in gestation crates where they can never turn around ever. And eventually they wear out and this pig farmer was kicking these disabled hogs and hot-shotting them out of the barn over a 4-foot ledge onto the ground, freezing cold ground, onto a pile of other dead and dying pigs, and then putting a chain around their neck and attaching the other end of the chain to the tines of a front end loader, and then lifting the fork of the front end loader and watching the sows hang for 5 minutes until they suffocated under their own weight. And fortunately, we got videotape of this, and we exposed it on HBO. They ran it 19 times in 1 month, this documentary called Death on a Factory Farm. And then they ran it for several years thereafter. So that was a great opportunity to educate the public about what goes on behind the closed doors of hog factories. So
it's incredible that they did it in the first place and then they kept running it.
Yeah, that was one of the few times when the media was actually our friend. They did a great job. And then there's also the Livestock Indemnity Program, which is a program which reimburses, compensates producers for dead livestock that die in inclement weather. And we got legislation introduced in Congress in the last session, which said, if you want to be compensated for animals that you didn't provide any shelter for, then you better provide shelter. We said all you need to do is have a disaster preparedness plan in effect for bad weather. And that's a very reasonable request. And that's what we asked in the bill in Congress. And we're working to get that bill reintroduced in this session.
Yeah, explain that a little like deeper in terms of like what actually happens when there's some horrific storm or really bad weather to these animals.
Well, this came to my attention one night when I was watching the evening news, and they said 40,000 dairy cows and their calves had suffocated in the snow in a snowstorm in New Mexico and West Texas. And I thought to myself, how can the farmers sustain such huge losses? So I looked into it and I found out about the Livestock Indemnity Program, which reimburses them 75% of market value for their losses. And there are weather incidents which are happening more frequently because of global warming all over the country. I mean, 70,000 cattle died in a snowstorm in South Dakota, 17,000 cattle died in a storm in Montana. I mean, since 2008, we've spent $500 million reimbursing producers for dead animals who they didn't provide any shade or shelter to. It happens in feedlots. It happens in hurricanes. It happens all the time. So it's like they have an insurance policy, but they have no insurance policy. They just get reimbursed.
And they don't have to do anything to get reimbursed. Like all they would have to do is move these cows into a barn or in somewhere where the snow isn't going to kill them.
Right. So all they need to do is come up with and implement a disaster preparedness plan. That's something very, very reasonable that we were asking. So we're going to get that reintroduced this session.
Good. I mean, that kind of stuff should be like no brainer, and it's still so hard because everything is about like saving them money, saving industrial agriculture money and giving them subsidies and bailing them out.
Right. Factoring in death losses as a cost of doing business and factoring in suffering as a cost of doing business.
How do you feel after this whole big run of this many years doing this work and now another book out there exposing so much in terms of humans and change and how we get people to change a little bit or a lot?
There are some evil humans out there who put profit above all else. It's really, really sad. How do we get people to change? That's why I wrote the book as a story, as a suspenseful thriller, so that people will want to read it and not just think it's going to be a litany of horrors. And that's why I say, please, please read the book and share it. People can join the Humane Farming Association. It's such a great organization like yours. I'm so grateful to Humane Farming Association for enabling me to do this work for so many years, and for their campaigns to expose animal cruelty. And we're involved in a lot of litigation against people who are breaking laws. And just share on social media. If you do eat meat, then definitely reduce your meat consumption, because bad things are happening and people need to know about it.
Yeah, I agree. Well, Gail, thank you. Thank you for all the years that you have given to the animals and to all the people that have been greatly affected by your work. And thank you for these books.
Thank you so much, Elizabeth. Thank you for having me on. Thank you for your kind words. And thank you for your support.
To learn more about Gail, to read her books, go to our website, speciesunite.com. We will have links to everything. We're on Facebook, Instagram, and TikTok at Species Unite. If you have a spare moment and can do us a favor, please subscribe, rate, review on Apple Podcasts or wherever you listen to podcasts. It really helps people find the show. I would like to thank everyone at Species Unite, including Gary Knudsen, Caitlin Pierce, Amy Jones, Paul Healy, Santina Polky-Link, Hannah Gabrielson, Bethany Jones, Patrick Norton, and Anna Kollner, who wrote and performed today's music. Thank you for listening. Have a wonderful day.